You know that feeling when you check your savings account and see, I don't know, maybe $8,347.62, and you think to yourself, I've been saving for years, and this is all I have to show for it? And then you see some article online about a couple in their early 30s who just hit $500,000 in savings. And you're like, how is that even possible? What am I doing wrong? It's this weird psychological trap where the first $100,000 feels like climbing Everest with ankle weights, while everyone who's already wealthy seems to just casually mention how their money just grows on its own now. And honestly, that phrase, money growing on its own, used to make me irrationally angry because it felt like such a privileged, out of touch thing to say. But here's the thing that nobody really explains properly: they're not lying. They're just describing a mathematical reality that you haven't experienced yet. And that's not your fault. The game literally changes after certain thresholds, and the first one, that first $100,000, is genuinely, measurably, objectively harder than everything that comes after. My name is Oliver, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, compound interest, behavioral psychology, and why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly, while others work just as hard and stay stuck at the same savings level for years. And what I've realized after looking at the actual numbers and talking to people at every stage of this journey is that the path to wealth isn't linear. It's not like you're climbing a steady hill where each dollar is equally difficult to save. It's more like you're pushing a boulder up a mountain, and the first section is almost vertical. You're barely making progress. You're exhausted. And then suddenly, somewhere around that $100,000 mark, the terrain changes, the slope levels out, the boulder starts rolling with you instead of against you. And by the time you're aiming for $500,000, you're basically just steering. And I want to explain why that happens, because understanding this distinction might be the difference between giving up at $15,000 and actually making it to financial independence. There's something profound happening here that goes way beyond just save more money. And once you see it, your entire approach to building wealth starts to shift. So let's start with the most obvious reason why that first $100,000 is so brutal. You're starting from zero, which means you're fighting against your lifestyle, your income, and basic human psychology all at the same time. When you're at zero or close to it, every dollar you save is a dollar you're not spending on something else. And I know that sounds obvious, but think about what that actually means in practice. If you're making, let's say, $60,000 a year after taxes, that's about $5,000 a month. And if you want to save aggressively, let's say you want to put away $1,500 a month, that means you're living on $3,500, which might sound doable until you actually break it down. Rent or mortgage, probably $1,200 to $1,800 depending on where you live. Car payment, insurance, gas, that's easily another $600 to $800. Groceries, utilities, phone bill, internet, maybe some student loan payments. And suddenly you're doing mental gymnastics just to keep your head above water. The problem is that your lifestyle has already expanded to fill your income. This is Parkinson's law applied to personal finance. Expenses expand to meet available income. You're not living extravagantly, you're just living. You've got a decent apartment, a reliable car, you go out to eat maybe once or twice a week. You buy the groceries you want without agonizing over every item. You're not being reckless, you're just existing at the level your income allows. And now you're trying to save $1,500 a month, which means you have to shrink your lifestyle, and that feels terrible. It feels like going backwards. I remember when I first tried to save seriously. I was probably 25 or 26, and I had this moment where I was at the grocery store and I wanted to buy the nice olive oil, the $18 bottle instead of the $7 one. And I stood there for like an embarrassingly long time having this internal debate about olive oil, because I knew if I was serious about saving, I needed to make these small decisions differently. And I bought the cheap one, obviously, but I felt bad about it. I felt like I was depriving myself. And that's the thing, when you're at the beginning, when you're trying to save that first chunk of money, every choice feels like sacrifice. But here's what's happening that most people don't articulate clearly enough. At this stage, you're using pure willpower and discipline to save. There's no momentum helping you, there's no passive income, there's no investment returns doing any heavy lifting. It's just you, your paycheck, and your ability to say no to yourself over and over again. You're saving through subtraction, through what you're not buying, not doing, not enjoying, and that is exhausting. That is why so many people burn out before they hit even $10,000. And then there's the emergency problem, because life doesn't care that you're trying to build wealth. Your car doesn't check your savings goals before the transmission fails. Your tooth doesn't wait until you're financially stable to crack and need a crown. So you save $5,000, and then your car needs $2,000 in repairs, and now you're back to $3,000, and it feels like you're running on a treadmill. You're working so hard and getting nowhere. I think this is why the advice "just save more" is so useless to people at this stage, because you know you need to save more. The issue isn't understanding the goal, it's surviving the psychological warfare of early-stage saving. It's maintaining motivation when the numbers barely move. When you save $500 and your account goes from $4,200 to $4,700, and you're like, cool, I'm 4.7% of the way to $100,000. The progress is invisible. The sacrifice is very, very visible. But let's say you push through. Let's say you somehow manage to save that first $10,000 or $20,000. You're still in the hardest part, but something interesting starts to happen. And this is the second reason why the first $100,000 is uniquely difficult. You don't have enough capital for compound growth to matter yet. See, everyone talks about compound interest like it's this magical force that makes you rich. And it is, but only after you have enough money for the compounding to actually make a psychological difference. Let me show you what I mean with actual numbers, because this is where it gets kind of wild. If you have $10,000 invested and it grows 8% in a year, which is roughly the historical average return of the stock market, you make $800. $800 for an entire year. That's $66 a month. Now, $800 is not nothing, but it's also not enough to meaningfully change your financial situation. It's not enough to make you feel like investing is working. It's basically what you might spend on a nice dinner and drinks with friends. So you're still in the mode where your savings are coming almost entirely from your own discipline, your own earned income, your own ability to not spend money. The investments are there, they're growing, but they're not pulling their weight yet. But watch what happens when you have $100,000 invested. Same 8% return. That's $8,000 in a year. That's $667 a month. That's real money. That's more than a lot of people's car payments. That's a vacation. That's starting to feel like your money is actually working for you instead of you just working for money. And this is the thing nobody prepares you for. The psychological shift that happens when your investments start earning more than you can realistically save from your paycheck. Because if you're saving, say, $1,500 a month through sheer discipline and sacrifice, and your investments are generating $667 a month passively, you're not at parity yet, but you can see it coming. You can see a future where your money makes more money than you can save, and that is a completely different emotional experience than staring at $10,000 and getting $800 a year. And by the time you hit $200,000 or $300,000, at $300,000, an 8% return is $24,000 a year. That's $2,000 a month. That's more than most people save. Your money is now doing more work than you are, and the compounding starts to feel less like a math concept and more like a tidal wave that's building behind you. But when you're at $5,000 or $15,000 or even $50,000, compound interest is this abstract thing that financial advisors tell you to care about, but experientially it doesn't feel like it's doing anything. You're still the engine, you're still the one pushing the boulder, and that's demoralizing because you're doing everything right. You're investing, you're being patient, you're not touching the money, but it doesn't feel like it's working yet because mathematically it kinda isn't, not in a way you can feel. Here's another layer to this that makes the first $100,000 so much harder. You're probably also dealing with debt at the same time, which means you're not even saving in a clean, straightforward way. You're saving and paying off student loans or a car loan or credit cards, and every dollar has to get divided between multiple goals. And this creates this horrible tension where you're trying to figure out the optimal strategy. Do I pay off the debt first? Do I save and invest while carrying the debt? Do I split the difference? And depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. Some people say pay off all debt before you invest a single dollar. Other people say invest while you have debt because the returns might beat your interest rate. And you're sitting there with $15,000 in student loans at 5% interest, trying to decide if you should throw an extra $500 a month at the loans or put it in an index fund. And it's genuinely stressful because both options feel simultaneously right and wrong. I went through this exact thing with my student loans. I had about $28,000 in loans at around 4.5% interest, and I was making decent money, and I kept flip-flopping between paying them off aggressively and investing more. And what I eventually realized, and this might sound like a cop-out, but I genuinely think it's true, is that the mathematical optimal answer matters less than the psychological answer. Because if the debt is stressing you out and preventing you from sleeping well or feeling secure, then paying it off is the right move even if the math says you should invest. But if you're comfortable carrying the debt and you'd rather build your net worth faster, then investing makes sense. There's no universal right answer, but the point is when you're in the first $100,000 phase, you're dealing with this complexity. You're managing multiple financial priorities at once, and it's genuinely hard. And then there's the income side of the equation. When you're in your 20s or early 30s and you're trying to save that first $100,000, you're probably also making less than you will later in your career. Maybe you're making $50,000 or $70,000 or even $90,000, which sounds like a lot until you're trying to save aggressively while paying rent in an expensive city and dealing with student loans and building an emergency fund. Your income just isn't that high yet, so the percentage you can save is limited. But by the time you're pushing towards $500,000 or $100,000 and you're in your mid-30s or late 40s, and if you've been strategic about your career, if you've switched jobs a few times, if you've upskilled, if you've negotiated raises, your income has probably grown significantly. Maybe you're making $120,000 or $150,000 or more, and that makes a huge difference because your fixed expenses haven't grown proportionally. Yeah, maybe you upgraded your apartment or your car, but you didn't triple your lifestyle when you doubled your income. So now you have way more margin to save without feeling like you're depriving yourself. And this is what people mean when they say it gets easier. They don't just mean the compound interest, they also mean your income grows, your debt decreases, and the gap between what you earn and what you need to live gets wider. At the beginning, that gap is tiny. You're squeezing every drop. Later, the gap is huge, and you're saving without even thinking about it. Let me tell you about something I call the visibility threshold, because I think this is one of the most underrated psychological barriers to that first $100,000. When your net worth is low, like under $50,000, you're basically invisible to the financial system. Banks don't care about you. Investment firms aren't sending you personalized advice. You don't have a financial advisor. You're not getting invited to exclusive credit card offers or real estate investment opportunities. You're just a regular person with a checking account and maybe a Roth IRA that you contribute to sometimes. The financial world treats you like you don't exist. But somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, you start to cross this threshold where you become visible. Banks start to notice. You start getting targeted offers. You might get a call from a wealth management firm. Credit card companies want your business. You have enough assets that people start treating you differently, and that creates this weird positive feedback loop where financial opportunities start coming to you instead of you having to seek them out. And I'm not saying this to sound elitist or to suggest that you need wealth to access basic financial services. That's obviously not true. But there is a real psychological shift that happens when you feel like the financial system is working with you instead of against you. When you're at $5,000 in savings, you feel fragile. One bad month and you're wiped out. When you're at $150,000, you feel sturdy. You feel like you have options. And that confidence changes how you make decisions, how you negotiate, how you think about risk. And here's the kicker. Confidence in finance has this weird way of becoming self-fulfilling. People who feel financially secure are more likely to negotiate for higher salaries. They're more willing to take calculated risks like starting a side business or switching to a higher paying job. They're less likely to make desperate short-term decisions. So the confidence you gain from hitting these milestones actually accelerates your progress, but you can't get the confidence until you hit the milestone. It's circular, it's frustrating, and it's why the beginning is so hard. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I didn't fully understand until I started modeling it out on a spreadsheet like a total nerd. The math of wealth accumulation is genuinely exponential, not linear, and our brains are terrible at understanding exponential growth. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say you start from zero and you manage to save $1,500 a month, which is aggressive but doable for someone making around $75,000 a year. You invest it all in a broad market index fund, averaging 8% annual returns. How long does it take to hit $100,000? The answer is about 5.5 years. 5.5 years of disciplined, consistent saving, of resisting lifestyle inflation, of saying no to yourself over and over again. And at the end of all that, you have $100,000. And it probably doesn't feel like enough. It probably feels anticlimactic. You've been grinding for half a decade and you're not even close to retirement. You can't quit your job. You can't buy a house outright. You've barely moved the needle on your long-term goals. But now, let's say you keep going at the exact same pace, same $1,500 a month, same 8% returns. How long does it take to get from 100,000 to 500,000? About 10 and a half more years. So it took you 5.5 years to save the first 100,000, and it takes you 10 and a half years to save the next 400,000. But here's what makes this so psychologically different. In those 10 and a half years, you're not really saving $400,000. You're saving about $189,000 through your own contributions, $1,500 a month for 126 months. The other $211,000 is coming from investment returns. Your money is literally making more money than you're putting in. By the end, your investments are generating something like $40,000 a year, which is more than you're saving annually through your own effort. So when people say the first 100,000 is the hardest, this is what they mean. The first 100,000 is almost entirely your own sweat and sacrifice. The next 400,000 is increasingly driven by the money you've already saved. You're still contributing, obviously, but you're no longer the primary engine of growth. The math is doing the heavy lifting. And I think what's so demoralizing about the early stage is that you can intellectually understand compound interest. You can look at the charts, you can read the explanations, but you can't feel it yet. It's this invisible force that people keep telling you to trust, but your lived experience is that you're just grinding away and barely seeing progress. You're being asked to have faith in a process that hasn't proven itself to you yet. And that's really, really hard. There's also this thing that happens psychologically in the early stages that I don't think gets talked about enough, and it's the constant temptation to reset to zero. When you have $12,000 saved, that feels like a meaningful amount of money and also like not enough money at the same time. It's enough that you could buy something significant, a used car, a really nice vacation, a new wardrobe, furniture for your apartment, but it won't change your financial life. It won't pay off your student loans. It won't be a down payment on a house in most markets. It won't fund a year of living expenses. So it exists in this weird limbo where it's simultaneously substantial and insufficient. And every single time something comes up, a wedding you're invited to, a car that needs replacing, a friend suggesting a trip to Europe, an unexpected medical bill, you have to decide whether to dip into your savings or figure out another way to handle it. And the problem is dipping into your savings always feels justifiable. You can always construct a narrative where spending the money makes sense. Well, my car is unreliable and I need it for work, so this isn't really optional. This is my best friend's wedding and I can't just not go. I've been working so hard, I deserve this. And none of those justifications are necessarily wrong, but each time you reset yourself back to a lower number, you're extending the timeline to $100,000 by months or even years. You're restarting the compound interest clock. And this happens all the time in the early stages because you don't have enough money to weather emergencies without touching your long-term savings. But once you have $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000, the math changes. You can have a $5,000 emergency and it barely makes a dent. You can take a $3,000 vacation and it's barely a dent. You have enough buffer that life's inevitable chaos doesn't send you back to square one. Your financial foundation is thick enough that it can absorb shocks without crumbling. This is why financial advisors always tell you to build an emergency fund first before you invest heavily. And honestly, I used to think that advice was kind of conservative and overly cautious. But now I think it's actually the most important thing you can do because it's what allows you to stop resetting to zero. Once you have 6 months of expenses saved in a high-yield savings account, you can let your long-term investments actually compound without constantly interrupting the process. Now, let's talk about income growth and career capital, because this is huge and almost nobody connects these dots properly. When you're trying to save your first $100,000, you're usually in the early or middle stages of your career. You're building skills, you're proving yourself, you're figuring out what you're good at and what you enjoy. And your income reflects that. It's decent, maybe, but it's not maxed out yet. You haven't hit your earning potential. But the beautiful thing about careers is that if you're strategic, your income can grow significantly faster than inflation, like way faster. I'm talking 50 to 100% increases over a decade if you're switching jobs intelligently, learning high-value skills, and negotiating properly. And this is one of the biggest secret weapons for getting from $100,000 to $500,000. But it's something you can't access at the beginning because you haven't built the career capital yet. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you start your career at 24, making $55,000. You're diligent, you save 15% of your income, you invested properly. By the time you're 30, let's say your income has grown to $85,000 through job changes and raises. And by 35, you're at $120,000 because you've specialized in something valuable and you've gotten good at negotiating. Your savings rate in terms of percentage has stayed the same, 15%, but the actual dollar amount you're saving has more than doubled. At $55,000, you were saving about $687 a month. At $120,000, you're saving $1,500 a month. Same effort, same discipline, wildly different results. And here's what makes this even more powerful. Your lifestyle expenses don't double when your income doubles. Yes, you probably upgrade some things, nicer apartment, better car, more frequent travel, but you don't go from spending $3,500 a month to spending $7,000 a month. You might go from $3,500 to $5,000. So your savings rate can actually increase as your income grows because the gap between earning and spending gets wider. This is why the journey from $100,000 to $500,000 feels easier. Not only is your existing money compounding, but you're also earning more, which means you're contributing more, which means the compounding is happening on a larger base, and you're adding more fuel to the fire. It's like you've got two engines running instead of one. But at the beginning, when you're trying to save that first $100,000, you've only got one engine, your own earned income, and it's probably not that high yet. So you're just pushing, pushing, pushing with no leverage, no momentum, no secondary forces helping you out. Let me talk about lifestyle inflation for a second, because this is one of those things that sneaks up on you and can completely derail your progress without you even realizing it's happening. Lifestyle inflation is when your spending automatically rises to match your income. You get a raise and suddenly you're eating out more, or your apartment is nicer, or you've subscribed to 4 streaming services instead of 2, or you've upgraded your phone plan, or you're buying nicer clothes. None of these decisions feel extravagant in the moment, they all feel reasonable and justified, but collectively they eat up your raise and your savings rate stays flat even though you're making more money. And the insidious thing about lifestyle inflation is that it happens almost unconsciously. You're not sitting down and deciding, I'm going to spend all my extra income. It just happens. Because humans are really good at adapting to new baselines. The apartment that felt like a luxury when you first moved in becomes just your normal apartment after 6 months. The car that was a huge upgrade becomes just your car. The nice restaurants you used to save for special occasions become Tuesday night dinner. We adapt, we recalibrate, and our spending grows with us. This is why people who make $200,000 a year can feel just as broke as people making $60,000 because they've inflated their lifestyle to match their income and they're still living paycheck to paycheck just at a higher level. I've seen this happen to people and it's wild. They're making multiple six figures and they're stressed about money and they have almost nothing saved because every time they got a raise, they just absorbed it into their lifestyle. But the people who actually build wealth, the ones who get from zero to $500,000 or more, they're the ones who resist lifestyle inflation. Not completely, because that's unrealistic and honestly kind of miserable, but enough to keep their savings rate climbing as their income climbs. They get a $10,000 raise and they increase their savings by $6,000 and their lifestyle by $4,000. So they're living better and saving more. Both things can be true. And this is why the journey from $100,000 to $500,000 is easier, because by that point, you've already built the habits and the psychological muscles to resist lifestyle inflation. You've already proven to yourself that you can make more money without spending all of it. You've internalized the discipline. Whereas at the beginning, when you're trying to save that first $100,000, you're still learning how to do this. You're still making mistakes. You're still figuring out where your weak points are. Here's something that's going to sound weird, but I promise it's relevant. There's a social dimension to saving money that nobody really talks about, and it makes the early stages so much harder. When you're in your 20s and early 30s, your friends are at all different financial stages. Some of them are still in grad school living on ramen. Some of them landed high-paying jobs right out of college. Some of them are broke but pretending not to be. Some of them are genuinely not caring about money and are just vibing. And you're all trying to hang out together, go to dinners, take trips, celebrate birthdays, and it's this constant negotiation where you're trying to be social without destroying your savings goals. And the thing is, if you're the one trying to save aggressively, you're the one who has to be the buzzkill. You're the one saying, actually, can we do something cheaper? Or I can't make it to that trip, it's too expensive. Or let's just hang out at someone's apartment instead of going out. And that's awkward. It's socially uncomfortable, especially in your 20s when you're still figuring out your identity and your place in your friend group. I had so many moments in my mid-20s where I felt like I was choosing between my financial goals and my friendships. Like, I'd get invited to a bachelor party weekend that would cost $1,500, and I'd have to decide, do I go and set back my savings by a month, or do I skip it and feel like I'm missing out on an important moment with my friends? And sometimes I went and sometimes I didn't. And there's no objectively right answer, but the point is, these decisions are hard, they're emotionally taxing, and they happen constantly when you're trying to save that first $100,000. But by the time you're working towards $500,000, a few things have changed. One, you have more money, so a $100 expense is 0.067% of your net worth. It's statistically irrelevant. And I'm not saying you should become careless with money, that's not the point. The point is you stop operating in this constant state of financial anxiety where every decision feels high stakes. And this creates bandwidth, mental bandwidth, emotional bandwidth. When you're not stressed constantly about money, you can think about other things. You can focus on your career. You can invest in relationships. You can take care of your health. You can pursue hobbies and interests. And ironically, all of those things, career focus, strong relationships, good health, they all contribute to your ability to build more wealth. So there's this virtuous cycle where financial security creates space for personal growth, which creates more financial opportunity.
The second thing that changes is optionality. When you have $200,000 or $300,000 saved, you have options. You can quit a job you hate and take 6 months to find something better. You can negotiate more aggressively because you're not desperate. You can invest in yourself, take a course, get a certification, start a side business because you have a cushion. Options are valuable, and there's something you just don't have when your net worth is low. The third thing, and this is the one that really accelerates everything, is that your investments become a meaningful contributor to your financial progress. Like I mentioned earlier, at $300,000, an 8% return is $24,000 a year. That's real money. That's enough that you can actually feel your wealth growing, even if you're not contributing as much from your paycheck. And once you feel it, once you see your net worth increase by $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 in a year when you only saved $18,000 from your income, that's when you realize, oh, this is what everyone was talking about. This is the exponential growth phase. This is where it gets easier. I want to address something that might be going through your head right now, which is, okay, this all makes sense, but what am I supposed to do with this information? How does knowing this actually help me? And that's a fair question, because yeah, understanding why the first $100,000 is harder doesn't make it less hard. But I do think there's value in knowing what you're up against because it changes how you think about your progress and your timeline. If you're at $15,000 right now and you're feeling discouraged because it's taking forever, knowing that this is the hardest part, that this is structurally, mathematically, psychologically the most difficult phase, might help you stick with it. Because you're not failing, you're not doing it wrong, you're just in the hardest section of the climb. And everyone who's made it to 500,000 or 1,000 or more went through this exact same brutal early phase. They're not better than you, they just pushed through the hard part and made it to the easier terrain. And the tactical takeaway, I think, is this. In the early stages, your focus should be split between two things. One, increase your income as aggressively as you can. Learn skills, switch jobs, negotiate raises, start side hustles, whatever it takes to grow your earning potential. Because at this stage, your income growth matters more than your investment returns. A $10,000 raise saves you more time and effort than optimizing your portfolio allocation. And two, build the foundation properly. Don't skip the emergency fund. Don't try to rush to $100,000 by taking on huge amounts of risk or by making yourself miserable. Build sustainable habits that you can maintain for decades, not just for 6 months. Because the people who burn out are the ones who try to sprint a marathon. They save 50% of their income for a year, they're exhausted and deprived, and then they give up and spend everything. Whereas the people who save 20% or 25% consistently for 10 years actually make it. There's one more piece to this puzzle that I think is worth talking about, and it's the role of luck and timing. When you're trying to save your first $100,000, you're often doing it during a specific window of your life, usually your 20s and early 30s. And what happens in the economy during those years has a huge impact on your progress. If you're trying to save during a bull market, your investments grow quickly and you get positive reinforcement. If you're trying to save during a recession or a bear market, you might be saving diligently and watching your account value stay flat or even decline, and that is brutal for motivation. I know people who started investing in 2020 and 2021 and watched their portfolios grow 20 or 30% a year, and they felt like geniuses. And then I know people who started investing in 2000, right before the dot-com crash, or in 2007, right before the financial crisis, and they had to watch their savings get cut in half. Same discipline, same strategy, wildly different emotional experiences. And the uncomfortable truth is luck matters. Timing matters. Being in the right industry at the right time matters. Having a boss who advocates for you matters. Not having a major health crisis or family emergency matters. And this isn't to say that effort and strategy don't matter. They absolutely do. But there's a randomness to financial success that doesn't get acknowledged enough. The reason this is relevant to the 100,000 versus 500,000 conversation is that the longer your timeline, the more luck averages out. If you're trying to save $100,000 in 5 years, you're very vulnerable to whatever happens during those specific 5 years. But if you're working towards $500,000 over 15 years, you'll probably experience both good markets and bad markets, both economic booms and recessions, and it all tends to balance out over time. Time diversifies your luck, basically. So part of why the later stages feel easier is that you've had more time for luck to even out, for market volatility to average into steady returns, for career setbacks to be offset by career wins. The early stage is higher variance, higher stress, more vulnerable to randomness. Let me bring this all together, because I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I want to make sure the core insight is clear.
The first $100,000 is harder than the next $400,000 for a cluster of interconnected reasons. You're starting from zero, so you have no momentum. Your income is probably lower, so your savings rate is capped. Compound interest isn't big enough to feel meaningful. You're more vulnerable to emergencies and lifestyle resets. You're still learning the system and making mistakes. You're dealing with debt. You're facing social pressure to spend. And you're building everything from scratch with no template or foundation. But after you cross that threshold, after you hit 100,000, or really anywhere in the $100,000 to $200,000 range, everything shifts. Your money starts compounding meaningfully. Your income has probably grown. You've built the habits and the system. You've gained experience and confidence. You have a buffer against emergencies. The math starts working with you instead of against you. And the journey from 100,000 to 500,000, while still requiring discipline and consistency, genuinely is easier because you're no longer doing it alone. Your money is helping you. Time is helping you. Experience is helping you. And I think the most important mindset shift is this. Stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 10. The person with $400,000 saved isn't smarter than you or more disciplined than you. They're just further along in a process that you're still in the early stages of. And they probably remember how hard those early stages were, even if they don't talk about it much. So if you're sitting at $12,000 or $35,000 or even $75,000 right now, feeling like you're never going to make it, I want you to know you're in the hardest part. You're doing the thing that's genuinely difficult. And the fact that it feels hard is evidence that you're doing something worthwhile. Easy things don't change your life. Hard things do. And the good news is that this hard part is temporary. Not short, it might take 5 or 7 or even 10 years depending on your income and your savings rate, but temporary. Because once you get through it, once you build that foundation, the next phase is genuinely easier. Not easy, but easier. The boulder starts rolling with you. The compound interest starts to feel real. Your income grows, your confidence builds, and suddenly you look up and you're at 150,000, then 250,000, then 400,000, and you're thinking, that actually happened faster than I expected. But you have to make it through the hard part first. You have to push the boulder up the steep section, and the only way to do that is to just keep going, keep saving, keep investing, keep resisting lifestyle inflation, keep focusing on income growth, keep building the habits, even when it feels pointless, even when the progress is invisible, even when you're tired of eating cheap olive oil and skipping expensive dinners and saying no to yourself. Because the math is on your side, time is on your side, compound interest is on your side. You just can't see it yet. And that's okay. You don't need to see it. You just need to trust that the process works, even in the early stages when it doesn't feel like it's working. Because it is. Every dollar you save is a tiny piece of future freedom. Every month you stay disciplined is compounding in ways you won't see for years. And one day, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years, you'll check your account and realize you're not in the hard part anymore. You're in the part where it gets easier, where it accelerates, where it starts to feel less like pushing a boulder and more like riding a wave. And when you get there, I hope you remember how hard the beginning was, not to torture yourself, but to appreciate how far you've come. Because getting to $100,000 is an achievement that most people never reach. And if you can do that, if you can survive the hardest part, then $500,000 isn't some impossible dream. It's just the next milestone on a journey you're already on. So keep going, keep saving, keep investing. Trust the process even when it feels like it's not working, because it is working. You're just in the slow part, and the slow part doesn't last forever.